So maybe that's a good place to start, where you just ended there on that note, which is doing things in a different way for the long term. Could you both talk a bit about the roles that you played in doing that, just to get the context?
One first. Oh, you go. Well, I think that I look at that video and what I see is we were struggling so much how to communicate, and I was hired about 6 years ago to basically work for an organization that told me, you're not our employee, you're going to work for this entity, the network of partners, and you're responsible to them, and what you're going to do for us is that you're going to keep us accountable and make sure that our agenda isn't always at the forefront. And I have 13 years of social service experience working after school programming, being the director of early childhood programs, and then kind of entering into this position and being given all this freedom to create and to be this entity made me really want to quit for that first year many times. But Pat assured me I wasn't alone because she and I go way back. So this journey actually started even before 2008, and that's where really Pat was integral in that role.
Yeah, Lila and I actually worked together. My background is in public health, and I had been invited in to a child welfare agency in Los Angeles to help them rethink their strategy around what is the role of social services in developing community and community development. And Lila came to me and volunteered when she was a college kid. So we go way back from there. But I developed and ran that strategy for about 10 years. And Alex, who you saw in the video, he's a CEO of a different nonprofit, child welfare nonprofit. But he had watched what I had done in this community and in this process over time. And so when I decided that I wanted to step away from running that center and that project, because I felt like I'd learned a lot and wanted to step back and look at the systems approach to really think about how to create that change. And so Alex actually came to me at that time and said he and his board were actually going into a new endeavor, and they were coming up to their 100-year mark, and they were really proud of that 100 years, but they wanted to look ahead at a legacy. And would I be a thought partner with them as they looked at the research, and would I help them reflect on, if it were up to me and they handed me and I looked at that research, what would I do around that? And so we actually started that partnership, if you will, in 2001. So you can see what the thinking and the thought and the transition of even one organization to think, were they actually going to make this commitment, and were they actually going to do this? Even though the research said it, and it's a huge commitment for even them to make. So that's, I've continued as the thought partner, recruiter, nudge. Sometimes I'm easy to get along with, sometimes I'm not. That person in the network.
I know you know that person.
So I'm hearing from both of you that there's roles you've had to take up about helping people rethink what they're doing, nudging people, but also holding people to account and having quite a lot of freedom to do that. So can you talk about what's happened when you've actually started to do that? Because people ask us to do that, and of course when we do it, and it challenges what's already going on, it's kind of a different story. So I'm interested in your learning through doing that, and what did you learn from doing it, but also what did you have to change in how you approached it?
I think I had to really be flexible, and it was really hard because when you're in the social service world and you are running a program and you get money to do something, you have a scope of work. I remember thinking when I first got hired on, I had no scope of work. I didn't know what were we accountable to, what were our outcomes, did we have a budget? I didn't even know. And it was this complete freedom, which was nice to be creative, and yet I didn't have structure. And I was really, really wanting structure. And I think that I was really fighting against myself, and I had to really change in terms of how I started to think about the world and the work. And it was only through my own personal reflection and change process was I able to then talk to other partners in different sectors about what this was like. And so it really became a lot about relationship building. And I spent a lot of time, meeting with people and talking to them about what they do, because I was recruiting partners to a voluntary network. And so people weren't getting paid to participate in this. And so I was needing to motivate them in a very tangible way. And so for a lot of years I thought of myself as a cheerleader and then a translator of the knowledge, because then I had all these other folks saying, well, here's what we want, where we want to go, and I'm thinking, this is so complex. I need to make this in a language that actually makes sense. And so I think it was helpful that I came from a direct service world, because then as I was working with partners in that world, I understood how to talk to them. And so that it became, I translated the language of systems and complexity, and even the word population, scalability, all of these were different things, different words at the time, where you might be focused as a social service agency that is just responsible for a certain number of people. Maybe it's serving 100 families that year. How do you get people on board to a shared vision?
And what was your edge with that then for you? What was the learning edge that you had to get over to take that role up?
Honestly, I had to be very vulnerable. And I had to recognize that there was a lot I didn't know. And the key was to really think that and understand I wasn't alone. And that was the bonus, I think, of even though the Children's Bureau said, okay, we're not your boss, and you're gonna lean on other network partners for support, it actually, I did have to go to people and ask, what does that mean? I remember the first year that I worked, and Pat had designed a theory of change along with other partners at the circles, and she would say, okay, I want you to practice talking about this. And I was so scared because I thought, I don't get this language. I don't know how you are trying to have me talk about it. I remember getting really upset with her, and at that moment, many moments, wanting to quit. And so it was really saying, okay, well, who's out there? So you saw Ruth on the video, native New Zealander, who I would just go to because I needed some empathy, and I needed to just have this caring, wonderful woman who I could just say and cry and say, this is so hard. And then I could go to Pat, and then I could go to Maura from UCLA, and we could talk data and a whole other kind of concept. And so it was this vulnerability and flexibility, and really saying, if it doesn't work, don't do it. And just throw it out and try something else. And don't be so committed to any one strategy if it's not working. And so that was important.
And Pat, what about you? What was because you've been brought in quite a different role.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, you being the prodder and having to push people. What was the edge for you? What was the learning that you had to do?
It was it's that balance of, you're in a support role, but you're also having to be in a provocative role at times. So one of the first points of crises in that mode was when we did the launch. It was Lila's almost first day, first week, right?
First week.
And that was our huge launch, and we had all the partners come in, and folks wanted to open up so there had been a small core group that Alex and I had been working with that had said, here's the research, here's the goal areas, here's a general kind of vision statement. It wasn't this vision statement, but a general, because what was the invitation, right? What are people even coming to? So we opened it up in a facilitated process, and folks changed it, right? And so it was that first moment when Alex was also confronted with, he doesn't control this, right? So we had a little debrief after the facilitative session, and that debrief was rough, right? And Alex just
imagine a very angry father, really pissed off.
He was mad, and no doubt, and he and so he just went at us. I think we've all been in some moments like that, and we had to just kind of let that go for a minute, and then I was sitting and I was like, wow, I was trying to listen so hard, like what was he so upset about? Like I just couldn't get it. So I was trying to listen so hard at this, and then he said, what the trigger for him was that folks wanted to introduce and have human rights in the statement, and so he finally got to it, because I kept going, Alex, I'm not understanding, and he was getting madder and madder because he thought I was just trying to deflect, I was just trying to say, you're wrong, and I wasn't. I was like, I don't get it. And then he said human rights, and he's like, how am I gonna bring human rights to my conservative board? Like, what am I going to say to them? We cannot have that in the vision statement. And then we all just sat back going, what's wrong with human rights? And then I sat there and I went, oh, Alex. And we just looked, and he looked, and all of a sudden we realized we had a generational shift in the room. We were, and what we thought of human rights was very different than what Alex was experiencing it, and what he thought and knew how his board would experience that term as too political, right? And so
what did you have to do differently then in terms of how you then engaged?
Well, I actually had to tell him that his behavior was unacceptable.
And how did you manage the pushback that came after that?
I managed that by saying, because he was stunned, because he is the CEO, he's used, you know how that goes. And he was stunned that I said it, and I said, it's absolutely unacceptable, and this is what I will say to you. I can absolutely hear you if a decision comes in that you need support, that is not manageable for you as an organization. That is one thing. However, I will not work in this way. And so if you don't trust me to understand that I actually can hear your concerns, then we shouldn't work together. And we had been working together for years. So that was that first push to realize, and it was a shift for him, it was a shift for me, and it was a shift for Lila, because because we're all in this together and saying we have to trust each other in a very different way now, and it's bigger than us. This really was the launch.
So if we take those themes together around being vulnerable, being flexible, being able to get it wrong, and realize something's not working, and at the same time confront things, set boundaries around actually the limitations, and being able to challenge authority.
Yeah.
You're talking about doing that on an individual level, at a system level. So I'm assuming that what you've done has been mirrored through your whole system, that other people have also had to learn to work in this way. How have you ripened the broader system to be able to do that? That everything you're talking about is really it's a practice, it's a way of doing things that's quite counter to perhaps what usually goes on. So how have you done that? How have you ripened that for other people to engage in? Can you talk to that?
I think for myself, the whole notion of partnership, and we tried, in the beginning, I tried so hard to create, again, structure, because it's what I was familiar with. So I said, okay, let's get a steering committee going. And And Pat was like, really? And I said, well, who am I going to be accountable to? Like, how are decisions going to be made? And this is voluntary, and how are people's voices going to be heard? So we went through all these different processes, and ultimately it was really narrowing down who was committed and who wanted to play, and who wanted to be part of this in different ways. And so we targeted a group of individuals. They were part of the partnership, but that said, they held a certain role at the organization. So they were the senior leadership, executive director, and said, we're connected to other networks, and we're influencers, and we are people who can also make change in communities. So it was identifying those folks as the champions of this Magnolia initiative and ambassadors. And so we dumped the word steering committee, we dumped the word leadership, and we adopted the words ambassador champions, and they held responsibility. So it was also about if I want their staff to engage, because it was really important that I didn't just engage a person, that if we were going to have a partnership with an organization, it would be with the organization at all the different levels, as many as possible. And so an ambassador champion would sit at one level, and then there needed to be buy-in that they allowed their staff to participate. And how they participated might have been in various different levels, but these were different conversations, because again, I was the only staff person for 2 years, and we were trying not to build this around staff. This was around how do a group of individuals get behind an initiative that they owned and they took ownership of.
So being one of the only staff people, and you were there in a support role, what anchored you through this process? How did you sustain yourself? And I mean, you've both been in it a long time. What's been the key things that have sustained you personally?
I keep waiting to get bored, quite honestly, and I'm not, and I'm always learning, and I'm keeping my ego in check all the time, because I'm so surrounded by really smart people in different ways, and the grounding is understanding where my skill is, and I had to really figure out, like, why am I here, and why isn't Pat just running this? And again, I mean, she was my boss for a number of years, and so it shifted from this, she was my mentor at the age of 19 and my boss, and then there were years that we separated, and now she was my contractor. I signed off on her contracts. It was a real shift in roles, but I still felt like she was my boss. And so right. So I had to find, what am I good at? I really had to say, what do I bring? Because I didn't really want to always be the cheerleader. And then you're just a talking head, and it wasn't good. And so I had to find my skill, and what I really found was that I'm a really good interpreter. And so that these hard concepts, people really understood it when I talked about it. And I was really willing to also have fun and do meetings in a different way, because we talked so much about not having meetings just to have meetings, but have meetings for action. So it was always about, okay, so how am I going to get people to actually do something in this 2 hours, and that they're really, they're being productive, and because I only have them in this little amount of time, and then they're voluntary, and then I might not see them next month. So that was important, was to find the skills.
And Pat, so what's anchored you?
For me, it's been an incredible group of people that are really committed to trying new things and being intentional and taking some risk. along with that. And I don't know about you all, but that's really an incredible opportunity to be in a group of people who are willing to kind of learn. I mean, I read a lot of books, and so folks were like, well, why don't you host a book group? We'd love to actually have a deeper conversation, and we just want to know what your book list is. I was like, oh, you do? Like, that's cool. Like, and so it's kind of it's creating a community of folks who want to be together and having the flexibility to create that space that works for people, that fills you, and it fills them up in a way that they can then go out and be out in other spaces. Because, you've got folks working in county government, you've got folks in all kind of ways, and what folks have liked and what I like about it is, where do you get the reflective space that you actually really are willing to take, like a book group, 2 hours out of a month, that you're going to sit and not talk about novels, but talk about the books that are actually informing the work, right? And these are hard concepts, right? And what is that theory? What the heck does that mean? And what would you do with that anyway? And do we care, right? It's kind of it's being a part of a community, and that's very grounding for me.
And we started to get people go, oh, I really like going to your meetings, but I don't know why. And I just know that I love them. And it's like my therapy. I'm like, could we maybe put that into some sort of words, or, so I can capture outcomes from that, or, and no, we just really like coming to your meetings.
So are there any questions that people have got around this process that Pat and Lila have gone through? We've got time for some questions.
Is the reason people liked coming to your meetings because of the actions, like that they didn't feel it was a waste of time, or was it fun or something? What was the
I would say, it's people walk away, so it's being purposeful of using people's time, right? And why we change things up is, if the meeting structure doesn't even work, we apologize and we move on and create another meeting structure. Because the intentionality is, was there any added value to this meeting? These folks, you probably have this in communities as well, folks have all kinds of meetings that they're sitting around with the same people around anyway. So it's basically, what do we actually need to go deeper to really bring intentionality to the work? Do we need to learn new processes? Let's try out new facilitative techniques so that you can try those out with your staff. Let's strengthen, use the expertise of the network to improve the strength and capacities. So what people are getting at a senior level is professional development and shared professional development in some new techniques and strategies. We've developed a fellowship program for middle management. We have brown bags for coaching for staff. We have a whole other approach that is a different engagement of community partners with community members. That's a different partnering relationship.
So Pat, I'm hearing that there's a lot of things you've had in place, but it also sounds like there's something about the space that you've created as well.
I think so, and even bringing it back to collective impact, when the article first went out, we sent it out through the network, and we started to say, does this offer language to describe what it is that we are? What pieces of this do you like? What pieces resonate with you? And it wasn't this, we need to now adopt what this is and say, now this is who we are. And that was, we had an experience with that with the protective factors and this other framework. And so we had gone through that process of creating who are we, and how can we take the learning that's out there, the latest buzz, but also make it our own, and really take the expertise. So it wasn't, I think there's not a lot of shoving things down people's throats to accept this is the latest, and so this is what we're going to do, because not being a funded network, we're also not necessarily chasing dollars.
Okay. So we'll just move to another question. There's one at the back.
Thank you very much for a really interesting presentation, and you feel like a kindred spirit. I'm much earlier on in the process, but I completely have those same roller coaster of emotions. My question was that you spoke at the beginning about having to engage with all these people, and I was just wondering, could you talk a little bit more about how you've done that? Because I've certainly found that as our movement has grown from 35 people to several hundred, I'm struggling with ensuring that we maintain the momentum with everybody.
Yeah, yeah.
Keep it brief.
Yeah, we've tried to look at multiple ways of communication and multiple strategies for that communication. We have an online vehicle that we actually use as to build community and have that constant connection, and that's interspersed and very purposeful. So we don't just have it like it's nice if it would work. We bring intentionality to it, that we actually track it and spur connections and connect people to each other. So the staff's commitment, it isn't just Lila's job to make those connections, it's the whole role of the staff is to strengthen relationships among and between network partners and community groups and residents. So that actually is their function. So it isn't one person, and then that becomes the culture of the group, that folks are actually fostering that and going after. And when we see folks teaming up, that's when we actually also say, can we support you? Is there some mechanism or some tool, some strategy that we can support you to make that connection work for you? What are you coming together around?
Thanks. We might just hold questions there. And I think that's where we're going to end. And I'm just had this conversation with Pat and Lila as you go back. What's the radical work that's undone for you, just to end on?
So just really quickly, last year I hired a community organizer to do the work of our Belong campaign, which is our mobilization within the community. And I hold a lot of bias around community organizing, and I'm really trying to let it go. And it feels radical to me, and I'm trying to trust the process. I kind of hate that phrase, but I've been told to trust the process. And actually, it was through the recommendation of one of our partners, who are always doing the human rights partner, who said, you need to hire a community organizer. And I said I would trust partners and their opinions. And I said to her, if I do this, are you going to support me in really adopting community organizing? And so I think this is still the radical thing for me, as I have left and seen what's happening with our Belong campaign. So.
And Pat, for you, what's your radical undone work?
Well, I have a lot of undone work. I don't know how radical it is. But the big commitment for me is in just feeling it, even in the conversations that I've had with folks, is it's time to write, right? And it's time to share that writing and get reflection back from other people who are doing this work, right? So.
Thanks. Yeah. Pat and Lila are both going to be doing a workshop tomorrow. So if you want to hear more and really get into the process and what's happened in Magnolia Place, there's an opportunity to do that more with them tomorrow. But please join me in thanking them for being so kind.